My perfect husband was secretly framing me for a serious accusation involving an organized scheme and forbidden substances to save himself from dangerous radicals. I was one signature away from facing dozens of years in prison before I realized the man I loved was actually my greatest predator. I thought I knew the man I had been married to for 7 years. Mark was the kind of husband who remembered every anniversary, brought me coffee in bed every Sunday, and always knew how to make me laugh when work got too stressful. We were the golden couple of our social circle, the ones people looked to as proof that true love still existed. But as I sat across from him at our mahogany breakfast table 3 weeks ago, I realized I was living with a stranger. It started with a small request. Mark had been working as an independent financial consultant for years, or so I thought. He told me he had found the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to invest in a massive commercial development project that would secure our retirement by the time we were 45. There was just one catch. Because of a technical glitch with his credit history caused by a former business partner, he needed the initial bridge loan to be in my name. "It's just a formality, Elena," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet as he squeezed my hand. "The project is guaranteed. I've put everything into this, but I need your signature to push us over the finish line. Don't you trust me?" That question, "Don't you trust me?" was his favorite weapon. It was the ultimate conversation stopper. If I said no, I was the villain, the unsupportive wife who didn't believe in her husband's dreams. So, despite the cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I agreed. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Mark. My Mark. For the next few days, he was more attentive than ever. He bought me jewelry, planned a surprise weekend getaway, and spoke incessantly about the bright future we were building. But I noticed things. He started carrying 3 different burner phones. He would step into the garage to take calls at 2 a.m., his voice low and urgent. When I asked him who was calling at such an hour, he would just smile and say it was the overseas investors, and that the time difference was a headache. The day we went to the bank to finalize the paperwork, the air felt heavy. Mark was unusually frantic, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He had dressed in his most expensive suit, looking every bit the successful businessman, but I noticed a fine sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He kept reminding me exactly what to say, that the money was for a private family investment, and that I had full knowledge of the business plan. We were led into a private office at the back of the branch. The woman waiting for us was named Mrs. Sterling. She was an older woman with sharp gray eyes and a professional demeanor that felt like a shield. She didn't offer a warm smile. She just opened a thick folder and began scanning the documents Mark had submitted online the night before. Mark was talking a mile a minute, explaining the projected returns and the minimal risk profile. He looked like a man trying to sell a miracle cure. Mrs. Sterling didn't look up. She flipped a page, then another, her expression growing more unreadable by the second. "Mrs. Thorne," she said suddenly, her eyes finally locking onto mine. She didn't even acknowledge Mark's presence. "Are you aware that this loan application is for nearly $800,000, secured against the entirety of your inheritance and your parents' estate?" My heart stopped. Mark had told me the loan was for a fraction of that amount, and he had never mentioned my parents' home. I looked at him, my mouth dry. He didn't even flinch. He just leaned forward and said, "We discussed this, Elena. It's the only way to maximize the leverage. The returns will cover it tenfold within 6 months." I felt a wave of nausea. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. Mrs. Sterling tilted her head, her gaze drifting to Mark, then back to me. She closed the folder slowly, her fingers tapping against the leather cover. "Mr. Thorne," she said calmly, "could you please step out for a moment? I need to verify a few personal security questions with the primary applicant alone. It's standard procedure for a loan of this magnitude." Mark's face went pale. "That's not necessary. We are a team. We do everything together." "It is bank policy, Mr. Thorne," Mrs. Sterling replied, her voice turning to ice. "Unless you'd like me to cancel the application right now?" Mark stood up, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He shot me a look, a warning look that I had never seen before, and walked out, closing the door behind him. The silence in the room was deafening. Mrs. Sterling waited until the door was fully latched. She didn't look at the loan papers. Instead, she pulled a small, handwritten note from her desk drawer and slid it across the table toward me. "Elena," she whispered, her professional facade completely gone. "You need to listen to me very carefully. Your husband thinks I'm just a loan officer. He doesn't realize I've seen this organized scheme before. If you sign these papers, you aren't just losing your money, you are signing your way into a massive internal security investigation." She leaned in closer, her voice barely audible. "The investors he's talking about, they aren't businessmen. They are part of a network that the Internal Security Service has been tracking for months. And Mark isn't their partner, Elena. He's their fall guy, and he's trying to make you his." I felt the world tilt on its axis. The air in the small, sterile office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I looked at the note Mrs. Sterling had slid across the table, then back at her sharp, unwavering eyes. She wasn't joking. This wasn't a mistake. "What do you mean, fall guy?" I whispered, my voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. Mrs. Sterling leaned in even closer, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "Your husband has been under the radar of our internal security check for months. He's been moving small amounts of money through offshore accounts, money tied to an organized scheme that deals in forbidden substances and the movement of unlawful weapons. But they've hit a snag. A large sum of money has gone missing from their network, and the radicals he's involved with are not the type of people who accept excuses." I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. Mark? My Mark, who cried at Pixar movies and spent his Saturdays gardening. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "They need a clean name to take the heat," she continued, her eyes darting toward the frosted glass door where Mark's silhouette was pacing back and forth. "If you sign these papers, the $800,000 will be flagged immediately. Within 48 hours, the authorities will move in, because the loan is in your name and the funds are being routed through accounts linked to your inheritance. You will be the primary suspect for a huge term. We're talking dozens of years for involvement in an organized scheme and accusations of particularly grave crimes. Mark will claim he was just managing things for you. He'll walk away with a deal and you'll be the one the system crushes to send a message." My stomach turned over. Every "I love you," every Sunday morning coffee, every "don't you trust me?" It was all a setup. He wasn't building a future for us. He was building a cage for me. He was going to sacrifice my life, my reputation, and my parents' entire legacy just to save his own skin from the criminals he'd crawled into bed with. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, a sudden spark of suspicion flaring up. "Why help me?" Mrs. Sterling's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "My daughter was married to a man like Mark. She didn't have anyone to warn her. She's currently serving a long sentence for a serious accusation she didn't even understand. I couldn't sit here and watch it happen again. Not on my watch." She pulled the loan documents back toward her. "I'm going to tell him there's a problem with the system, a technical delay. It'll buy you 24 hours. You need to leave him, Elena. You need to go to the Internal Security Service yourself before they come for you. If you're the one who blows the whistle, you might have a chance." I nodded, though my mind was a chaotic blur of betrayal and terror. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with shaking hands. I had to play the part. I had to be the doting, trusting wife for just a few more hours. When I opened the door, Mark was there instantly. His eyes were wide, searching my face for any sign of trouble. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice tight with an edge of desperation he could no longer hide. "There's a delay," I said, forcing a small, frustrated pout. "Mrs. Sterling says the server is down for maintenance. We have to come back tomorrow morning to finalize the transfer." Mark's face shifted. For a split second, the mask slipped. A look of pure, primal rage flashed in his eyes, a darkness so deep it made my blood run cold. But then, just as quickly, the golden husband was back. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Typical. Well, at least it's just a day. Come on, let's go home and have a drink. We should celebrate anyway. The drive home was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Mark kept talking about the project, about the beach house we'd buy, about how everything was finally falling into place. Every word felt like a physical blow. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, watching the city blur past, wondering how I was going to escape. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a black SUV parked 3 houses down. It was idling. The windows tinted so dark I couldn't see the driver. Mark didn't even glance at it. "I forgot my phone in the car," I said, as we walked toward the front door. "Go ahead, I'll be right in." Mark nodded and stepped inside. I hurried back to the car, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't need my phone. I already had it in my pocket. What I needed was to check the glove box. I'd seen Mark hiding something there earlier that morning. I fumbled with the latch, my breath coming in jagged gasps. The glove box clicked open. Inside, tucked behind the insurance papers, was a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out and flipped it open. My heart stopped. Inside wasn't a business plan. It was a set of forged travel documents, a new passport for Mark under a different name, a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country for tomorrow night, and a single printed photo. The photo was of my parents' house. There was a red X drawn over their bedroom window and a handwritten note on the back that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. The debt is paid when the girl is in custody, one way or another. Suddenly, the car door behind me was ripped open. I spun around, the envelope still in my hand, to find Mark standing there. He wasn't smiling anymore. In his hand was a second burner phone, and on the screen was a live video feed of my parents' living room. "You shouldn't have looked in there, Elena," he said, his voice as cold as a grave. "Now we have to change the timeline." He didn't give me a chance to scream. Mark's hand clamped over my mouth, his strength surprising me as he shoved me back toward the house. Gone was the gentle man who brought me coffee. In his place was a predator, whose eyes were dark with a desperate, jagged energy. He dragged me into the kitchen and threw me into a chair, his breathing heavy as he looked at the manila envelope I was still clutching. "You had to push, didn't you, Elena?" he spat, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Everything was set. The loan would have been flagged, you would have been taken into custody for the organized scheme, and I would have been halfway across the world with the funds I've been skimming for months. It was supposed to be clean." "My parents, Mark," I choked out, the image of their living room on his phone screen burning in my mind. "How could you? They treated you like a son." "They were collateral," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The radicals I've been working with don't care about family ties. They care about the missing capital. I told them you were the one who moved it, that you were the mastermind. If the bank doesn't approve that loan by tomorrow morning to cover the gap, they're going to act on that red X in the photo. Do you understand? You're going back to that bank and you're going to make sure that money moves." He thought he had me cornered. He thought the threat to my parents would keep me obedient. But Mark had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the woman he had spent 7 years lying to. He thought I was just a victim, but I was a woman who had been warned. "I can't wait until morning, Mark," I said, my voice suddenly steady. "Mrs. Sterling gave me a private number. She told me if there was an emergency with the application, I could call her personal line to bypass the system check. She knows the radicals are watching the accounts." Mark stopped pacing. His eyes narrowed, greed warring with suspicion. "Show me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, but I also pulled out the small note Mrs. Sterling had given me. On the back, in tiny print I hadn't noticed before, were 3 digits followed by a sequence. It wasn't a phone number. It was a silent distress code for the bank's internal security system, a panic password used when an employee or client was under duress. "Call it," Mark ordered, hovering over me. "Put it on speaker." I dialed the number, my heart hammering against my ribs. After 2 rings, a voice answered. It wasn't Mrs. Sterling. It was a man with a deep, robotic tone. "Security verification required," the voice said. "Please provide the authorization code for the Thorn investment." I looked at the note. I read the sequence of numbers, but at the very end, I added the 3 letters Mrs. Sterling had circled twice. "SOS code accepted," the voice said. "The transfer is being processed. Please remain at your current location for final confirmation." Mark let out a long, shuddering breath. He slumped against the counter, a triumphant, ugly smile spreading across his face. "See? That wasn't so hard. You just saved your parents' lives, Elena, and you just guaranteed your own seat in a prison cell for the next 20 years. He reached for the burner phone to call off his associates, but before he could press a single button, the front door didn't just open, it exploded inward. The windows shattered as flashbangs illuminated the living room in blinding white light. I dove under the table as boots thundered across the hardwood. Mark didn't even have time to reach for the unlawful weapon I now realized he had tucked into his waistband. "Internal Security Service, stay down! Hands behind your head!" I watched from under the table as Mark was tackled to the floor. His face was pressed into the rug, the golden husband finally looking like the small, pathetic criminal he truly was. Within seconds, he was in zip ties. A hand reached under the table, offering me help. I looked up to see Mrs. Sterling standing there, wearing a dark windbreaker with the internal security emblem on the back. She wasn't just a loan officer. She was an undercover investigator who had been embedded at the bank to catch exactly this kind of organized scheme. "Is my family safe?" I gasped as she pulled me up. "Our team moved in on your parents' house the moment you entered that distress code," she said, her voice firm and comforting. "The radicals watching them were intercepted. Your parents are safe, Elena, and so are you." She looked over at Mark, who was being hauled toward the door. He looked at me, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal, as if I was the one who had ruined him. "We found the offshore accounts," Mrs. Sterling told him as they led him away, "and we found the forged documents in your car. You aren't going to a non-extradition country, Mr. Thorn. You're going away for a very long time on a serious accusation of financial fraud and involvement in an organized network." 6 months later, I sat on my parents' porch, the sun warming my face. The divorce was finalized, the house was sold, and the golden couple was a ghost story people whispered about in our old neighborhood. Mark was serving a massive term, his network dismantled. I looked at the small silver pendant Mrs. Sterling had given me the day I gave my final statement. It was a reminder that the truth might be buried under layers of lies, but it only takes one person with the courage to see it, and one woman with the strength to fight back, to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. I wasn't the fall guy. I was the one who survived.